Hey everybody, it's the Rain Man. Hope you like the new artwork in the studio. Thanks again to my friend Chassis Bell at Chassis Bell Design and Branding. I'm real excited about it. It looks great. The interview that you're about to see with my buddy Matt Woody Kidd, head distiller over at Storyhouse Spirits, the studio looks a little bit different because we were waiting for that artwork to show up. So before I send you over to the interview, Matt wanted me to pass this announcement on to any of the coyotes from HMLA 775, which is a squadron that both Matt and I flew together in the Marine Corps. If there are any of you coyotes out there listening and you live in the San Diego area and you're interested in learning how to distill spirits, Woody is looking for potentially an intern or somebody he can kind of show the ropes on how to make and distill spirits. So if there are any coyotes out there in the San Diego area, look Matt up through the website, storyhousespirits.com. Get in touch with him. Hopefully you guys can work it out. But Woody wanted me to pass that on, especially to all the coyotes out there. So that's it for the announcement. Please enjoy the interview I do with Matt, and that's it. This is the Rain Man. Talk to you soon. Thanks. 3, 2, 1, here we go. Hello everyone, I'm Brian the Rain Man Lucas. Welcome to Rain Man's Take, observations on the world we live in. We're going to take a deeper dive into topics of interest to me, including politics, current events, history, popular culture, and social issues. You'll find the diversity of topics refreshing. In our clickbait, soundbite society, we rarely get the whole story. Rain Man's Take interviews interesting people as well as peeling back the onion on specific topics, all with the goal of getting people to think more deeply about a subject. Hey everybody, it's the Rain Man. My guest today is Matt Woody Kidd, co-founder and head distiller of Storyhouse Spirits here in San Diego. Matt, how you doing?
Doing well, buddy.
Good, good. I'm going to be calling him Woody most of the day, and the reason why is he is an old friend. He and I flew together in Iraq in 2004 and 2005, and he's a good old buddy of mine, so his call sign is Woody, so I will be referring to him as Woody. And before we kick into to Matt's story, I don't know if you remember or not, but it was you, Rhino, me, and Jekyll the first night that we actually had ordnance coming off the rails in the middle of the night in Iraq and Fallujah. So we go way back.
Heck of a night.
Yeah, we go way back, and now Woody makes whiskey, and that's what we're going to talk about. So, Woody, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
You're welcome, brother. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, what you were doing before you started Storyhouse.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, you and I met in the Marine Corps. We were flying. I was flying whiskeys. You were flying years, and did that for a better part of 12 years. And prior to that, schooling was more creative side with architectural design and such. So after the Marine Corps, I got out, separated in 2005 after a nice another trip to the to the desert. So. So when I got out, I kind of went back to my development side of things with architecture, and got a job with a national home builder just in time for the housing crash. So that was a lot of fun. It's character building at least. Yeah. So, but with that, I kind of saw what was coming. Being in the industry at that time, and you kind of see. The warning signs, if you will. So I started packing my own parachute, and at the time I'd been approached by some people in the military intelligence industry, or those that wanted to get in to supply military intelligence side of things on photography side. So got involved with developing, basically integrating GPS position with photography and such, and so. With a major camera manufacturer, and from that started my first company was Geotechnical Solutions, and we supplied intelligence collecting pieces of equipment that were photography related. So cameras, and we ended up incorporating rangefinders into the whole bundle, so that when you took a photo, not only to tell you where you were when we took that photo, but also what the location of the object of the photo was. And so that was really a great piece of technology and integration that we sold back to the military and to other federal assets and such. So did that for a number of years and started to pull back from that and become more of just an advisor back, kind of a strategic advisor back to the company as I was kind of working on my current kind of passion project.
Yeah. So hold on, that company you were with, were they guys from the military, or how did you get hooked up with that?
So it was Ricoh, America's Corporation. So Ricoh, they had a big kind of a camera division that was focused on business solutions.
Yeah.
But for them, it was really, more civilian.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like kind of hospital type applications, asset protection or management. Yeah. So things like that. And this is back when, DARPA was initially, so Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA was interested in integrating GPS into photography.
Yeah.
I was a part of a team that secured the bid to bring that first phase of technology and prove it to DARPA essentially. So out of that, of course, it was where geotactical was born, because now we started integrating not only GPS position, but then all of a sudden, range finding and such like that. So it was a fun time. It was a fun time, to say the least. But no, my original contact, he was a former Marine. He was enlisted 4 years, got out. There was a real kind of a technology, science geek. Really loved that kind of stuff. And he found me through a series of connections. I can't even remember like exactly how he found me. And we started talking. I started listening, and more and more we kind of talked about it. We saw that we were onto something, and he was working for Ricoh at the time and was aware of the DARPA need. And so he was trying to find the minds, if you would, to bring that to fruition. So that's kind of where it started.
Nice. And then that whole time you're making whiskey in the kitchen?
Back then I was just doing beer. Kind of like what you have in your spot, where I had a small brew house that you're always kind of working on and improving and screwing up, and forcing some bad beers on friends, and sometimes you hit a good one and they all like it, and you get better over time, right? But back in those days, I probably made a lot of bad beer as opposed to good beer.
So you started just home brewing, and were you just like going crazy? I mean, were you just making batch after batch after batch, and then you just got into it and transitioned, or how'd that?
But honestly, so not necessarily batch for batch like you might think, but frequently enough to where you start honing your skills and you start really you learn from your mistakes. You make enough mistakes, you start to see why people are doing things the way they're doing, why they're choosing the pieces of equipment, how they're chilling, how they're all these kind of things. You start to learn more and more, and so the interest grows, and you actually start to become good at it along the way too.
Yeah.
But no, that was really the beginning. Then I got introduced to whiskey, Scotch actually, first off, and that's where my real interest started. And I just really enjoyed that. And then I started researching just kind of out of interest, and I'm like, wait a minute, to make Scotch, to make whiskey, to make, you start with making a beer first. Well, I can do that. Okay, so what's the next steps? And that's where my curiosity really started getting going. And at this time, I was at a place in my life where I had enough, financial cushion so that I could, kind of start to think bigger.
Yeah.
And then just simply like trying to do something in my garage.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly kind of what I did. And then what I did really before I started writing any business plans, I started really thinking and getting into the weeds of it. And I got under some really good mentors in the industry.
Yeah.
And fortunately for me, I think it's a really lucky thing. I found mentors that were doing it on a larger scale, not just at a small scale where if you make a mistake, it doesn't really hurt in the pocketbook so much, and you may or may not remember it and learn from it. Hopefully you do, but when you're doing things at a commercial scale, we're talking, I'm working on a 40-barrel system, so roughly this is called 1,200 gallons. you make a mistake there, it hurts.
That's a big mistake.
Yeah.
So where were you at? If you were in Colorado at the time when you did this?
So I had actually I started the original kind of planning when I was here still in San Diego, and we had left San Diego, went to Salt Lake City to go to help a friend scale his new development business. And I kind of told him, I said, I don't make a great employee, but I'll come and I'll help you, you know, for 2 years. I give you 2 years of my time, you know, and from the time I leave, but before I leave, this is what I plan to leave you with, you know. And so, you know, left them with, you know, years of runway ahead of them, so on and so forth. Did that in Salt Lake, and during that time, so I really got into it in earnest as far as the business planning goes.
Gotcha.
And along that way, I've been working with mentors. My last one was up in Minnesota.
Okay.
And so I ultimately end up, you know, kind of fast forwarding now, been working on some large systems, distilling, owning my, you know, my practices, you know, my nose, my palate for understand, you know, faults and flavors that you do want when you make cuts, for instance, on the distillate and everything like that. So honing those skills, and then kind of fast forward, I end up making a deal with him to take over his distillery for a little over 8 weeks' time. And that's where I ended up making the whiskey that I now have in barrel. And I purposely did that so that, you know, I knew that, well, once I open up my distillery, it's going to be at least 2 years, if not more like 3 years, before I actually have any brown spirit ready to sell. So that was my kind of stopgap, if you will. So make enough to last 3 years selling on site and across the bar. So that was, but yeah, that's kind of the, you know, quick version, if you will, of how I got to where we're at now.
So at any time when you were like doing the home brewing, did you think about doing the brewing, making that commercial, or going commercial with the beer? Or
no, because I enjoy beer, I really do, but once I kind of got the whiskey bug, it was like beer was like a necessary part of the process, not the end process, not the end product. It was that for me. It wasn't that. I enjoy making a great porter or stout, for instance, in the wintertime. You know, I'm not a huge, you know, hoppy fan.
California IPA guy?
Yeah, West Coast IPAs. I mean, I've made plenty of them, sure, but if you ask me what I want to drink, it's more of like a good lager or even a really nice clean ale. And then as, you know, the colder months set in, my beers get darker and darker until we come out the other side again. So, but so that's, But no, I never thought to go commercial in the beer side.
And then it almost sounds like, unless you were giving us a real Reader's Digest version, it almost sounds like you made a pretty quick step from homebrew to wanting to get into whiskeys to talking to mentors and up in your. So there wasn't like a few years where you were making whiskey in the garage.
No, and that's where I kind of say, like, I was really fortunate, really lucky, because I happened to meet, you know, some really good guys. And this industry, I tell you, is so welcoming, and the people in it are really collaborative. And, you know, ultimately, we're all separate businesses, and at some point you end up being in competition against each other, looking for shelf space, so on and so forth. But I'll tell you, you go to any of the conferences, you know, the American Distillers Institute conference or American Craft Spirits Association conferences, you know, they each hold them, you know, one a year, and you go there, and it's like a reunion, and it's awesome, because during the year we may talk, email or a phone once in a while, or that kind of stuff, but we don't see each other but once a year, and it's like a reunion, kind of like almost like with the Marine Corps, and everyone's willing to help out. And if you got a question, you know, I mean, I've got some great barrel aging philosophies and studies, you know, from a good friend of mine in Minden. It was just his thesis, you know, and he's like, hey, here you go, boom, throw the whole thing at me. And I'm like, geez, you know, here's a year and a half worth of work that you just threw at me because I happen to be a friend and a colleague. You know, that's just kind of the way it is. It's a lot of readiness to give
Yeah.
and help out. So
Very
it's kind
cool.
of fun.
And when you go to those conferences, do you bring a bunch of your stuff, and do you guys?
Oh yeah, we always do that.
Yeah.
It's always have, we always have a couple of bottles in our bags, and you're sharing, and especially if you're playing with something new.
Yeah.
That's even more so. It's and no one pulls punches either. So it's like,
And that's good.
it lets you know. It lets you know if you're
if you're on the right track.
Yeah.
Not better to know early than
yeah, exactly.
later.
So yeah.
That's awesome. And so, when did you actually start Storyhouse?
So Storyhouse in earnest began in 20. Let's see. Boy, you're gonna. It's filed as a business in 2015.
Okay.
But the business planning, all that type of stuff. I mean, the real push, honestly, there's a lot of work that goes into that.
Yeah.
Thinking and it's kind of like when we plan for a mission, right? I mean, you're thinking about every possible contingency.
Right.
Okay, what if this?
Yeah.
What's our reaction to that? How do we do it?
Yeah.
Same thing in a business plan, and then you put it out to a few trusted heads, if you will, and all right, shoot holes.
Yeah.
What haven't I answered? What haven't I thought about?
Yeah.
What doesn't hold water?
Yeah.
And so it was a long process. I had an original partner, and he and I ended up splitting ways. He's still doing a thing, has a distillery himself as well, so I'm happy to say that. That's great.
Very cool.
And,
Did he go back? Did he go back to Utah?
No, he stayed in California.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and it was, but that was in earnest. And then again, the real, push then when we started to look for funding and such. Not an inexpensive venture. So.
Yeah.
Really started in earnest in 2016.
Yeah. And so the barrels that you did up in Minnesota, when did you start that?
So those were 2018.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, 2017. So in July and September they were barreled.
Okay.
And two different big pushes. And to tell you, that was an interesting time.
I bet.
This would probably make most brewers and distillers blush, just to how much. So the system I was working on, again, a big commercial system, but it had never really been pushed to the limit of what it could do. And because I had limited time,
Yeah.
I wanted to, to be able to produce as much as I could.
Right.
I found myself literally about 3 days in a row when I was mashing, for instance, because that was the real bottleneck for me on their system, working 20+ hour days.
Really.
And so quick. I mean, I slept literally on the office floor 2 of those nights just to wake up and start it all over again, because we were doing double mashes. And a normal mash for them, when their cooling system was kind of the kind of a bottleneck, if you will, and a normal mash on that size would take 6 to 7 hours. Problem was that first mash would eat up most of the cooling water, and so the second mash, the delta between how cold I was and how hot it was cut in half, if you will. So, and that delta between the temperatures is how you get to a temperature.
Yeah.
You have to have enough difference in there to actually be able to come down, and so that second mash would take north of 10 hours. And so it was just really brutal.
That's crazy. That's crazy. I mean, we'll get into the equipment here in a second, but so at the very beginning, you hook up with the mentors,
mm-hmm.
and you get to the point where you're like, I feel good about this recipe.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, yeah, this looks good. You should give it a shot. Is that how that went down? Or did you know from the beginning, like, I want to do this, and then you kind of learned to make it, or was it the other way around?
Well, so one of the benefits of having a mentor, someone who's been doing it, they have recipes that are tried and true, and then as a brewer and distiller for them, you learn, okay, this is the grain bill for this bourbon, for instance, right? And and there are there are federal guidance on what makes a bourbon, for instance. If we're talking bourbon, it's at least 51% corn in the mash bill. The mash bill being all the different grains that we're going to have and to get our flavors, right? So you have some restrictions, but that other 49%, there's really no restriction on what that can make up.
Right.
You can add more corn, or you can add other grains, malts, and stuff like that. So you kind of, my mentors help provide the foundation, the basis, from where I said, okay, this is a good bourbon, right? It's it's an award winner. It does great. So yeah, I know I'm starting from a good place, but you know what? This is what I like personally in a bourbon. Yeah. This is what I want to taste. I want to try and bring this out. And the thing is about an aged product is that 60 to 70% of the actual flavor, though, comes from the barrel. The sugars in the barrel and the char. So you still have to put something good in there that's going to help that process and bring out flavors. But the kind of real point of it being is that you really don't know how good it's going to be 2-3 years down until 2 years down the road. So that's the real risk. That's why it's like, it would be a very overwhelming and daunting task, I think, to just strike out and try and start without having a mentor. Or not, in my case, not going and making whiskey on a small scale, on a small still in my own garage, something like that, which I didn't do. I went straight to, somebody that was working, they had a 500-gallon still, for instance. So it's like, but what's nice about it, again, was that having that relationship and, giving my time, giving all that to them for free, they're willing to open up and say, hey,
so you were basically almost interning, just for free.
Well, essentially it was. Essentially it was. And so, but you start with a good foundation and knowledge and someone there ready and willing to answer questions and look at your mash bill that you're proposing. Listen, I want to throw some of this, and that. And he goes, well, okay, I think you're way overdoing it here because you don't need much of this. Because it'll start to throw you the other way. It's like too much. So you go back and forth, and so by the time I went and took over the distillery for those 8 weeks, I was very confident in my grain bill. I had already done small batches of it, and could taste the new make, this is coming off of still, and it was hitting the profiles that I was hoping for that would come across. Now, though, it was still, how's it going to come across after being aged in a barrel? So still that part.
Have you tried any of that stuff from Minnesota?
Oh, absolutely. This is.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Here. This is just. It's funny. It's just a sample bottle that I had from one of our original packaging ideas, but. I pulled this straight out of the barrel for you.
Okay, very cool.
I think was this the holidays they gave us to you?
No, this was so Woody. For a time, right when the COVID nonsense started, he was doing some. He was transitioning part of the distillery to making hand sanitizer. So you brought up a bottle of hand sanitizer and then a bottle of this. And no, folks, he did not give me a half a bottle of this. This is very good stuff that I'm sure we'll be partaking during the course of this interview. But. So that's what 2 or 3 months ago when you dropped.
I think so. Yeah, that sounds about right. So
whatever. I know you told me and I forgot, but whatever happened with that? The group that wanted the hand sanitizer fell through.
So, I kind of again in talking with other distillers, I could hear what they were doing and how kind of and then listening to reports and just trying to put my ear to the ground. I wasn't personally comfortable with just going out there and purchasing a bunch of raw product, mashing it, turning it into sanitizer, denaturing it, barely turning it into ethanol, and then denaturing it because that essentially poisons it so that you can't drink it.
Gotcha.
So it takes it from a beverage ethanol to a non-beverage ethanol by adding certain things to it. And so I wasn't real keen on making that big of an investment because I didn't see this hand sanitizer demand lasting very long for the small guys. And and to kind of be truthful, like in San Diego, we have the highest capacity still, of any of these guys, and still I was like, I don't see this taking going very long,
Yeah.
and so I didn't want to put a lot of investment into all the raw materials and be stuck with now something sitting on the floor that you can't get rid of. Because in my opinion, the big guys, they weren't going to take them very long to step back in and ramp up production to meet demand.
Right.
And the Purells of the world,
Yeah.
right? So, and some of my colleagues here locally, for instance, were getting beer from some of the major beer manufacturers. The Stones, for instance, that had beer that was going to perish, was going to spoil, and so they started sending them stuff. So that was a good thing,
Yeah.
So my friends at Old Harbor, they did that, and they were turning the IPAs and the different beers
that
into ethanol and eventually into hand sanitizer.
Really?
So they were using some of the spoiled beer or beer that was coming to date
Oh, interesting.
to make that, and so that was a great way.
Yeah.
Kind of like to kind of close it off on why. So we were working with a group that was looking at contracting with some of the city and state governments and some of the large corporations that were finding themselves, like the airliners, for instance, that needed to all of a sudden sanitize everything between every flight.
Yeah. Yeah.
So but again, my thing was like, I'm going to have to have a contract and a requirement to purchase to really stick my neck out, because where we were with Storyhouse,
Yeah.
and that means we completely upend our production and what we're trying to do to get the distribution to satisfy this hand sanitizer demand that I didn't think was going to last very long. And ultimately, the contracts never came to fruition, and literally within a handful of weeks, this craze or this demand was basically gone.
Yeah.
And the big guys had already stepped back up, and so it's one of those things where you go, wow, I'm glad I didn't just jump right in at the first indication of things. But so it was an interesting time. I tell you, for about 3 weeks it was just mayhem. People coming and knocking on the door, wanting this and wanting that, wanting answers for this. How fast can you produce this? How many?
Really?
Oh yeah, it was crazy. How much can you handle for us bringing it into you? If we bring it into you, how quickly can you turn around? And what is it? It was
Interesting.
It was kind of crazy. So
Wow, that's crazy. So for the micro distilleries, obviously is Storyhouse, is that considered a micro distillery?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What? It seems like San Diego. 10 years ago, it was all the rage for the microbreweries, and now it seems like it's all the rage for the whiskey scene.
Our big brother, if you will, beer, has been down this path, essentially 20 years ahead of us.
Yeah.
And so, you've got several epicenters in the U.S. for craft beer. Denver being one of them, Portland and Seattle kind of being the northwest, and San Diego is another one. And you've got others on the East Coast, but as far as west of Mississippi, those are kind of your epicenters. I mean, the great American Beer Festival happens in Denver every year.
Yeah.
You used to. and so, yeah, I mean, my numbers are a little dated now, at least by a year or so, but there are over 150 craft breweries in San Diego alone.
Crazy, yeah.
Yeah, it is, right? And so 20 years ago, we were seeing this kind of hockey stick of new breweries and success in microbrews coming up, and with craft distilling, we're seeing the same thing. The difference is that fortunately, our big brother in craft beer has paved that way already for us. So they've made a lot of the stumbles that we're hopefully avoiding now.
Yeah. How many of those? It seems like, just to me, it seems like a lot of those breweries are making their own whiskey now too.
There's been a fair number that have transitioned. Because like I say, to make whiskey, you start with making a beer first.
Yeah.
Albeit it's not a beer that you and I want to drink, but because we're making it for a different purpose, end result. But the whole front end of making whiskey is the same as making beer.
Which is making the wort, basically, right?
Yeah.
And then from there, then that's when the transition changes, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So we'll add our grain and our hot water, and we'll We'll cook it, essentially turning the starches into sugars,
Yep.
and then we'll cool it. We'll send it to the fermenter, and we'll pitch yeast because now yeast loves to eat sugar.
Yeah.
And the yeast is going to eat that sugar and kick out alcohol and CO2, amongst other things. But and then after, for us, about 5 days or so, we have now a 10% or better beer. And so now we take that. Now that's where, normally in the craft beer, we take that and, we do more cellaring and stuff like that to achieve different types of beers that we're doing, depending on what we were making, right? But sometimes you gotta, it's gotta sit, cold for, a month or whatever it may be. But for us, we're taking it right from there and we're going into distillation. And distillation, in the simplest form, is just simply the separation of ethanol from everything else. Ethanol being, what makes essentially vodka.
Yeah, and that's basically where you're just taking the condensation and turning that back into a liquid, right? Is that
right? Yeah. Right. So we're heating up the wort, and because ethanol boils at a lower temperature than water and everything else that's in that mixture, right? The ethanol vaporizes and it starts to rise, and we keep that temperature below the boiling point of water because we don't. If we start boiling water,
then the water will vaporize as well and mix
exactly, and then mix it with it, and our proof goes down and become less pure.
Yeah.
So we're trying to purify in distillation, right? And so it does that. And depending on what we're making, if we're making a whiskey, then we're coming off at a much lower proof. We have to be 160 proof or lower.
So you're talking about these oils coming off of the boil. Is that right? I mean,
So as we're heating up the mash, okay, the ethanol vapors or the ethanol is vaporizing.
Yeah.
But with it, the heavier vapor, okay, is still bringing a lot of these oils and compounds with it.
Okay.
Okay. So when we're making a whiskey, we want to clean it up to a certain degree. Okay. But we don't want to have it so clean. You keep going cleaner and cleaner, now you become vodka.
Yeah.
Right? Which by definition is supposed to be colorless, odorless, and tasteless. That's changed over time now. We actually have vodkas that have a nose to them, have a little bit of a flavor.
So that's going through multiple distillations to get vodka.
Right. Or we call them plates, and I'll kind of explain some of that. But the gist of it is, though, with a whiskey, we want some of those compounds to stay with the ethanol vapor and to come across. And so it vaporizes, then we put across some cold pipes to condense it. And it sort of recondenses into a liquid, and that's what we collect. So again, there's a regulation, we can't come off higher than 160 because if we start doing it, then it becomes too clean. And it's not what we're really achieving in a character of a whiskey, of American whiskey.
Right.
That's kind of, so like for us, we come across much lower than that. But it's because we're looking for a certain profile, certain characteristics. Even on the new make, we know when we're hitting it, and when we're starting to get, I mentioned some of that like kind of dirty sock smell or taste. That's when you're getting way too much of those compounds, those oils coming across. It means you're coming across too low proof.
So are you tasting it at that point when you first get it in the bottle after the first distillation? You're tasting it before you put it into the barrel, and then you have a sense of potentially what it's gonna.
Right.
What it should.
So you do it so much and so often like I can look and I can see. I know when to make the cuts, and it's pretty quick. And you make the first, heads cut. It happens, after it starts coming across, it happens pretty quickly. It's within, say 10, 15, 20 minutes tops. Then there's not a whole heck of a lot there if you're using a pot still.
Yeah.
And then the majority of the run is going to be running through your hearts, and eventually at the end, as the proof starts to drop down, you start bringing more and more compounds and start getting into the area we call the tails. That's traditional pot distillation. For us, we use a continuous still. And so for me, I kind of liken it to the pot still and the batch distillation is kind of like, driving your old manual stick shift, right? You got the clutch, you got the brake, you got the gas pedal, you got the stick, you got to change gears and all that kind of stuff. And it's the same way every time you do it. You still got to shift gears every single time.
And now you're just a Ferrari, you got the little paddle shifters on.
Basically, yeah. And so the nice thing about a continuous still is that, yeah, once you go through and you program your paddle shifters, if you will, right, now you can run, just continuously run, and the still for me will automatically take the heads off.
Gotcha.
It separates it.
Yeah.
Okay, so which is a really nice thing. And then we end up running through, and all the tails come off in the stillage.
Yeah.
So they never actually come across anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're pulling them off early. And so really the only thing that's coming off in our collection tank is our hearts. Exactly what we want.
Gotcha.
So it's a very efficient way of distillation. It's something literally that we call it a continuous still, because if I had enough wort, enough mash, I could run it 24/7 and it would just continue to crank it out.
Really?
So, yeah, so that's kind of the nice thing about that. But again, you kind of go back to it's like you have to understand how to achieve what you're looking for so you can get everything adjusted just right. Because we got everything just like a pot still. We've got, you know, heat and we've got cooling water, and that's your gas pedal and your brake.
Yeah. Okay,
and so you have to understand how that's interacting, all the different phases to achieve what you're trying to achieve.
Gotcha. It's StoryhouseSpirits.com, right?
It is StoryhouseSpirits.com. Mm-hmm.
Matt Woody Kidd, founder, master distiller, StoryhouseSpirits.com. That thing isn't going to drink itself, so
no, it's not.
why don't we try some of that?
So this is a little story here. So this is our straight rye whiskey. This, if I remember correctly, because I'm pretty sure I know which barrel I pulled from. I pulled from 992 for you. This was put into...
That's the best barrel. 992.
I pulled this for you, and because I know you, being a real connoisseur of things, so I didn't proof it down for you. I left it at barrel strength, which allows you to put it on an ice cube if you like, to allow it to proof down slowly so you can get the full effect from barrel strength all the way through to your drinkable strength.
So dude, is that why people don't put the ice in there to cool it off? They're putting it in there to cut it?
Both.
Yeah?
Both.
Okay.
But you know, so the nice thing, so we bottle our whiskeys at 92. Okay, and whereas like a Beam or Jack Daniels is at 80, there's you know reasons for thought of that. The reason why I go at 92 is because there are times when I like it neat.
Yeah.
In other words, I don't want to proof it down, and there are times when you know I do want to allow it to run through kind of the the different phases. Because as you add water is the beautiful thing about whiskey. When you add water, it opens up the whiskey, and it's really funny. So if we grab some water here and pour some whiskey, we can try it at 118 proof, and then we can add a little bit of water to it or an ice cube, and the nose will open up, and you'll start to experience whiskey at multiple levels as you're drinking it, as it proofs down. And unfortunately for me, whiskey doesn't usually get past 80 when I'm drinking it, just because I tend to sip on it.
Yeah.
But that allows a drinker. So if you like it neat and I like it at a lower proof, let's call it maybe my sweet spot somewhere around 84, right? If I bottle at 84, you're never going to enjoy your 92.
So, like a guy like me, obviously, I enjoy drinking spirits. I love beer. Am I going to know the difference between a 92 and an 80?
Oh, absolutely.
Really?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and and the reason too is it would. So in 80, a lot more water. You'll have a lot less what people will typically describe as heat.
Oh yeah.
So a well-aged whiskey, quite honestly, in my opinion, should never be hot on the tip of your tongue. Now, when you at 118 proof, barrel proof, you're going to have some burn. It's going to be hot somewhere. It is. But as we proof it down and we come through like 92, and we now then taste that on our palate, it should coat our palate. We should get all sorts of different flavors, the caramels, the vanillins, some of the deep fruits, and some of the spices you may pick up in it as well. Maybe you get a sense of dark chocolate, for instance, and stuff like that. So those things, as the water interacts with the whiskey, those become more and more easier to pick up and to enjoy. And a good aged whiskey too is not going to hit your palate and just disappear.
Yeah.
It's going to linger.
Yeah.
It's going to be slightly silky.
Yeah.
So those are the things that that I try to achieve when I make a whiskey. Like, I want you to enjoy it. I want you to have an experience from that first sip to that last. So so you enjoy it the way I do.
I love it.
Dude,
and as I'm smiling as you're saying this.
You can smell it, can't you?
Cheers. Storyhouse.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. So the reason why I'm smiling, Mike Wardo.
Oh, yeah.
So when we were in Iraq, Wardo and I had this funny banter. So just an aside here, we're gonna do some war stories. So Woody was one of the porch cigar smokers. We probably smoked 2 or 3 cigars a day. It seemed like.
Honestly, I think I actually overdosed at one point. And it was like I couldn't look at or smell another cigar for weeks because it was like, yeah, we had some good times.
That's all. You come back from a mission in the middle of the night. You're all jazzed up and you smoke a cigar and kind of chill. It's great.
We'd share stories, yeah.
Exactly. So over there, all of our friends up from the States would send these care packages, and inevitably there'd be plastic hiking bottles full of booze, and that's the only. It was technically a dry base where we were flying out of, but we all had a bunch of booze, and somebody sent me. I think it was for my birthday in 04 or 05, I don't remember which, but it was a Johnny Walker green label, just real nice shit. And of course, you're drinking it out of a plastic cup, which is really classy. But
hey, do what you gotta do, man.
You improvise, adapt, and overcome. Well, so Wardo and I one day were sitting in my tent drinking this stuff, and we're looking at a cigar, fishing out a magazine or something like that. And there was a guy talking about, or one of the articles was about the Johnny Walker Green, and the way the guy described it was like orange marmalade, and then the finish was like buttered toast. And, it was so off the top, it was so over the top. So now whenever I talk to Wardo, I always say, "How was your whiskey?"
Yeah,
it tastes like buttered toast and marmalade. But anyway, I digress. So talk to me a little bit about the difference between American whiskeys and like Scotch or Irish whiskey.
Yeah, so the biggest difference, well, there are a couple actually really big differences, so I'll hit on them. So one, let's talk about the grains. So the American whiskey being the kind of overarching family, right? Okay, and then underneath that you've got your bourbon whiskey, you've got your rye whiskey, for instance. You get parts of it.
Yeah.
And what those simply talk about is what the dominant grain is in the whiskey. Okay. It could be quinoa, it could be wheat, it could be corn, oat, rye, so things like that, right? And then so that's be the dominant, at least 51%, and then whatever else makes the grain bill is completely legal and all good. The other thing then talk about Scotch and Irish whiskey. Those are 100% malted barley.
Oh, really? Okay.
So no other grains. Okay. And so that's like the first big thing. So American whiskey, we have some variations and some ways to play to make it a particular style of whiskey, whereas Scotch is very refined in what it can and can't be. So, and they malt their barley. So it's 100% malted barley. And that process is basically you're tricking the seed, the barley seed, into germination, and then you're quickly stopping it, because what that's doing is that's breaking down the endosperm and stuff like that to release the starches to make them available for us to convert into a 10% wash, if you will, beer. Okay. Yeah. So it's a natural process because it's releasing enzymes within that the barley now is releasing those enzymes, helping everything break down.
Yeah.
In American whiskey, a lot of times we'll add malt and sometimes enough to have those enzymes to help everything convert. Other times you'll add enzymes to help the conversion itself. So totally separate, lipid enzyme to add and help. Another big difference between, say, Scotch and American whiskey is how you age it. So Scotch can only be aged in used.
Oh, really?
Used oak barrels.
Okay.
Okay. And there's a good reason for that. If you look at the Scotch landscape, they don't have forests of white oak. White oak is the kind of premier wood to age in for whiskeys. It's great. It breathes, but it's also waterproof. Doesn't leak when you make a barrel out of it.
Yeah.
So, and then when you toast it and you char it, it pulls all these sugars to the inside of the barrel, which now the new make whiskey goes in and interacts with.
Interesting.
So it's, so, but now American whiskey, to finish that thought, so Scotch used barrels. American whiskey, 100% new barrels.
Huh.
It has to touch new American white oak barrels.
Okay.
So that's those are kind of like two of the biggest differences between, say, Scotch and American whiskeys.
One thing that I find fascinating, that I love single malt Scotch, and I like it really peaty, where it's got that, it tastes like a Band-Aid.
So you do like a Lefroy.
So how do they get that? I mean, do they run it through peat? Is peat part of the process? How do they make it that?
It is, and so you'll have Scotches that are not very smoky at all, like your Macallans, for instance.
Yeah.
And then you'll, or Balvenie, and you'll have your Scotches that are really smoky, like Lefroy.
Yeah.
That's, I think, on the scale, it's the smokiest, the peatiest of Scotches. So peat is essentially what happens. It's a composting, if you will, natural composting of the heather grasses and stuff on the landscape of Scotland. And as you know, the seasons pass and the old growth, lays down and dies, and it gets, absorbed into the soil, it creates this lattice work of just roots and old vegetation. That what they did, because they didn't have wood, for instance, to burn in their stoves back in the day, like we do here.
They were burning peat?
They would burn peat.
Oh, interesting.
So
okay.
for cooking and for heat of the homes.
Yeah.
And so when you go back now into malting barley, okay, so again, we're tricking the seed into germination. So we add it, we soak it. We add it into water, like we're planting it, right?
Yeah.
So it's a dormant seed, and all of a sudden it gets all this water and goes, oh, all right, time to grow. All right, so it starts to sprout, starts to grow some roots. But then you're like, whoa, hold on a second. And when it does that, it's breaking down all of its, all of its shields, all of its, armor, right? And releasing enzymes. And so what it's exposing its starch so that we can now convert that to sugar when we cook it. But we're saying, okay, I don't want you to grow into a plant, so we got to stop you. So you put it over heat. Well, what do they use for heat?
Interesting.
Peat.
Yeah.
Now, the longer you toast it, that affects the smokiness.
Okay.
If you have a more moist peat, there's more smoke involved, which gives it a smoker character. So those phenols that come from the smoke, and it attaches to the barley seed, right? But the funny thing is, you go, oh, well, wouldn't that kind of go away or wash away or whatever it would be? It doesn't. It's a lot of it sticks.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so you can, depending on how much you smoke it and dry it, and it depends on how smoky that whiskey, that Scotch will end up being.
Fascinating.
So the whole reason, though, it's funny you stumble on that, but the whole reason for peat, for smokiness in certain areas of the country was because that was their primary fuel source.
Yeah.
And then they made those whiskeys. The farmers had extra grain and so on and so forth. They turned it into whiskey. They fermented it and turned it into whiskey. And so that's what those people in that region were used to, that smokier whiskey. Whereas in other regions, those farmers didn't make it as smoky. So they were used to less smoky. So it's all history.
By the way, that's Bruce Laughlin calling.
Is he? Jojo.
he's calling.
Shout out to Wardo and to Jojo, since we mentioned both those guys now.
Exactly. I love it. Cheers, guys.
Cheers, yes.
Brother, I love it. No, I never knew that. I knew that it had something to do with with the peat, but I just that's awesome, dude.
Yeah.
I love it. So, all right, back home here, back in America, what do you have on order at Storyhouse? What does your menu look like in terms of the whiskeys that you're making right now?
So right now we have what we'll have and release when we make a determination to open the front of house again is we have our rye whiskey and our bourbon. So both of those are at this point right now just over 3 years old, and so we'll pull enough barrels to last a few months, and then we'll pull and blend more barrels.
Yeah.
So and kind of work our way through the next 3 years until the stuff I'm making now is ready.
Yeah.
So.
And then the stuff that came from Minnesota, that's down here, and that's bottled and that's ready to go as well? Or?
That's what I'm blending and bottling
okay.
now. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So. Like I said,
So
that's the stuff that we'll sell across the bar and in our own on-site retail.
And when that's ready to go, ready to be sold, how old will it be at that point?
The age statement will be 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
it'll be north of 3 years. Yeah.
Dude, again, going back to Iraq with all the shitty booze that was sent over, we had one of our other buddies, JJ, Chicklets, JJ. One of his friends sent him a plastic handle of whiskey, and the name of the thing was Master of All He Surveys, and it was this proud elk standing on a ledge, and it said on the back, I'll never forget this, it said, distilled specifically for Albertson's grocery store, 24 months.
There you go.
Hey, when Ripper over there in Iraq said, sometimes quantity is quality.
Hey, we were in need.
Exactly.
So,
everything was good. Everything was
Exactly.
good over there. So, well, now we're back, and now you're making some seriously good, good booze. So, tell me, you also brought a bottle of gin over here today as well. So, is that the new project that you're working on, or what's?
Yeah. So, the nice thing about the white spirits, when I say white spirits, it's the non-aged. So your gins and your vodkas, rums. Tequilas, those are spirits that we can make and turn around and package quickly and to help bring revenue in. So it's interesting. So there's a little bit of a story here too, because while whiskey is where my real interest is and started.
Yeah.
I gotta tell you, gin is the most fun to make. And the reason for it is so gin really, the only limitation in gin really is your imagination.
Yeah.
Because there's so many botanicals out there and everything. So you can really have fun with it. You can do some very simple gins that are really, going to be more citrus based, or you can do more floral, or you can get some very complex gins, depending on what you're trying to do. But
juniper and cucumber and rose petals. And
yeah, exactly. So, to be a gin, by our standards, it has to be, predominantly has, juniper has your dominant botanical in it.
Yeah.
But after that, it's again, do you want to get on the citrus side of things? Do you want to use, orange, lemon, lime? Maybe Buddha's hand. Do you want to use lemongrass? There's certain things that come across as more citrusy. Even chamomile will come across as a little citrusy.
And how do you get that into the flavor? Is that in the boil? And
so
then the aromas
there's
come out
several ways. Yeah, there's several ways, and I use a couple different ways. You can steep it.
Like a tea, like a dry.
Right, exactly. Okay. Yeah. So you can take your botanicals, and I do that with the hardier botanicals, like the junipers, any of the berries, even like coriander and some of the roots, like angelica roots.
Shelled little, like a hard
pepper. So exactly. So pink peppercorn, for instance, the hardier botanicals I'll tend to soak in our we call it neutral grain spirit, but it's vodka.
Yeah.
So we proof that down, and then we'll throw those hardy botanicals in there, and we'll leave them in there for a good period of time to kind of penetrate and to pull those flavorful oils out into the distillate itself. And then we'll take those and we'll put them into the pot and we'll heat it up, and we'll take that across now. There's also a more gentle way of doing it. We call it you pass the vapor past the botanicals. And I do this for our lighter botanicals, ones that are a little bit more delicate. That if I were to throw them into, let's say, 100 proof or 80 proof vodka, essentially, right? It would really kind of strip everything, and even some of the bitterness or some of the profiles we don't want.
Right.
So when we put it into in line with the vapor on the still in what I call a gin basket. That's what we call it. And so it's basically a big colander almost, right? So
and you just pour the stuff in there, and the vapor goes
the
right up to
goes
it.
in there, yeah. And it's in the path of the vapor, so the vapor's got to go past everything.
Yeah.
And as it does, it gently pulls those oils and carries them across. And so then again it'll condense and
Very cool.
like that.
Yeah.
So I make my gins in multiple parts. It gives me the most control of the final profile that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Because I tell you, it's it's a real crapshoot. I think to just kind of throw everything in, at once and distill it all together, and now whatever you get, you're kind of stuck with.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for
instead
me,
of being able to modify it along the way.
Right. So like this dry gin, for instance, and this is just kind of a sample bottle. I threw one of our labels across. This is our California dry gin, and we've got 9 different botanicals in that. And when I do it, it's I've got three different parts to it.
Yeah.
So not including the proofing water, which I don't include. It's not a flavor. So
Gotcha.
I've got a base that I make, and then I've got 2 different flavoring distillations that I do, and then I take those three components and I'll blend them together in my lab until we hit the right profile that we're trying to.
Yeah.
We're trying to repeat this over and over.
Yeah.
If we're making this again, we have all of our our lab notes and everything like that we go into it. The neat thing too about gin is that from one harvest to another, the profiles of your botanicals can change.
And that has nothing to do with you in the process. That's just nature making
That's just
a different
nature,
peppercorn.
Yeah, slightly different. The weather that year
Interesting.
might have been more or less harsh. Who knows? So whatever's going on. So if let's say hypothetically, I put X number of pounds of juniper in this time, it may or may not come across as strong as it did last time.
Right.
So it's tough. You can't say, okay, I'm going to make 300 gallons of dry gin on the dot, and it's going to taste this way. It's a blend. It'll be somewhere near there, because it'll be a blend of these different profiles to get exactly what we're looking for.
Now, when you're doing the blending, is it just you, or do you have your partners are with you?
So I do the initial blending, solo, and I get it and I narrow it in, and then once I start narrowing it in, then we start doing tasting panels. We start seeing what's being picked up, on the nose and on the palates, and start getting the feedback and such, and I'm taking notes and I'm trying to really dial into exactly what we're trying to achieve with our particular gin.
And you had mentioned kind of in pre-production you had a couple of projects you were working on. Is that the gin you were referring to, or is there other things that you've got kind of going on?
So we've got the benefit of one of our major partners is a winery. And so they have an estate winery up in Boston.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's
and so
cool.
It is really cool, and it's a real fortunate thing. So we're bringing a lot of industry knowledge from the wine side into the fold, if you will, and so we're looking at ways to be more collaborative with that effort.
Yep.
So. And talking about a gin, obviously the obvious thing there is, grapes. How can we better utilize, maybe in a new way, maybe in a tried and true proven way, to incorporate, some of their grapes into our gins, for instance.
Cool. And what about like port? Do they make port already, or is that
they don't make a port?
Because isn't that basically what port is? Just wine with like grain alcohol, and then it just
So they don't.
ages?
So
That's
it's funny,
kind of cool.
Exactly.
And
It's
as
common conversation.
Oh, it has.
It's not
Because I was going to
something
say, make it RAINMAN'S port.
Well, we know to do something for you special, but no, but it's kind of a fun thing about the collaboration too. Is we're always thinking about things. And so one of the other great things is that they've got a fantastic farm manager up there, and so previously I've been having our heirloom grains, like our Bloody Butcher heirloom corn, for instance, grown for us, and that was grown up in Northern California, up in Winters. And well, they've got the estate here, and so she is putting together a really incredible program up there. And so in the future, we see ourselves growing our own heirloom grains.
Very
up there,
cool.
which, you know, they're more of our special projects,
Yeah.
as opposed to, you know, the bulk of our grain. But it'd be nice to have our heirloom corns up there and our heirloom rye, for instance, and such. So have them grown on the estates.
Nice.
And fun stuff, yeah.
So the distillery is downtown San Diego on J, and just a really cool old building that looks awesome now. It's got at one side it's got a really cool mural painted on.
Yeah.
It's just a cool building.
Yeah.
But in that neighborhood, there's what, Old Harbor's down there. There's probably 2 or 3, aren't there? Whiskeys in
Yeah,
that
there's Old
distillers?
Harbor, and then Laura Johnson has You and Yours.
Okay, that's that real
down
small
there.
one, that kind of room.
Yeah, but she's expanded as well, and she's getting into some RTDs or ready to drinks, you know, canned cocktails and such.
Okay.
So she's got a small production facility in addition to her first location just down the street from us as well. So and then a bunch of
Yeah, so how is Storyhouse been welcomed in terms of the quality, and I mean, where do you
Well, we're still very much the new kid on the block,
Gotcha.
Especially downtown. And again, since with COVID and everything like that, we took the opportunity to kind of update or improve some of the equipment in our kitchen.
Nice.
You know, we originally were going with using a wood burning oven as our primary and almost only cooking source.
Yeah.
And the chef we had was doing phenomenal work out of there, but we ultimately we were realizing a choke point in it as well.
Yeah.
And so when this kind of all hit, and with the new partnership, we took advantage and said, you know what, we're gonna go ahead and add some, turn this into a normal commercial kitchen.
Yeah.
So we're not limited.
Okay.
And we don't have the choke point. So because we do have the mezzanine upstairs,
Yep.
which is awesome for private parties, when we can do that again, of course. But being able to satisfy a private event like that, and not just satisfy it, but knock it out of the park,
Yep.
really boils down to once you get past the awesome people that are supporting the event and serving. It really comes down to what are your capabilities and your equipment, like what can you do, like what challenges your staff have to overcome just to be awesome. Can you make it easier on them? So that's what we looked at, and so we took the advantage of this downtime and said, let's go ahead and add a few pieces of equipment that would just make it a lot easier. So
and just for full disclosure, obviously you already know that Woody's a good friend of mine, but last year for my 50th birthday party, my wife had a surprise birthday party for me down there at the distillery. So we did the tasting tour, and then we had the party up on the mezzanine. It was pretty good.
Yeah,
it was
that was a fun time.
Yeah,
that was a fun time.
So that place is all good. I can't wait to get back down there. Obviously everybody in the food service type industry is hurting right now, but I mean, it's crazy. I mean,
it is.
They have to. My personal opinion is that we need to open this up. We need to.
Yeah,
open,
it's boy, I tell you, it's it's really tough, and without being political and such, it's just, man, is it really doing a number on our economy? Mm-hmm. Our neighbors, next door to us, the Mission, they've been there for what seems like forever.
Oh, the restaurant closed.
No, they didn't close, but so today.
Because they have a couple of outdoor seating on the porch, right?
They do, they do.
But that's obviously not enough to.
It's not enough, and they've got other restaurants downtown in the area as well. But so their bread and butter, for instance, is breakfast and lunch, and they close at 3 p.m. And so, but like I said, they've been there for what seems like forever.
Yeah.
And certainly a cornerstone in East Village,
Yeah.
especially in our immediate neighborhood. And I tell you, so today it was. I was down there. I pulled in this morning to open up Storyhouse and getting some production work done, and in our common parking lot between us. So between the two buildings on the block, there's a parking lot, and it's got dumpsters and a couple of spots for like the management of mission and all deliveries for us and deliveries for them. And I've got two 6,500 gallon water tanks for our cooling system and our chiller. So in other words, not pretty, right?
Yeah.
But this morning they had 3 10 by 10
Tables out.
Tents, and they're trying to figure out how to open up that space for Saturdays and Sundays.
Wow.
Trying to generate enough seats for people to hopefully bring in some revenue to make sense for them.
Yeah.
And so it's like again, walking down the street to Basic Pizza. Good friends of mine there, talking with Eric, who manages the place, and same kind of a story.
Yeah.
He's pushed out onto the sidewalk, but they've never had sidewalk seating.
Yeah.
Never needed it.
Yeah.
They had the big open doors and great space, but they have all their dining, of course, on the sidewalk, and then pushes across into the parallel parking lane, which the city of San Diego, fortunately, is allowing restaurants to do.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, it's just the experience isn't there for the customers, and that's what I think is really, really tragic too. Because I think customers would be good with the social distancing inside of a restaurant, because when you go out to eat, right, it's atmosphere, it's the food, it's the conversations, it's not feeling like you're intruding or awkward or so the experience, the dining experience is really being challenged right now. And I went out to dinner just a few nights ago to one of my favorite spots, and you can just you sense the challenges that they're having immediately. They've got 3 different beers that we ran through. Our third beer, they finally had some in, and they aren't doing certain things. They have a really refined menu or scaled down menu, and it's an interesting time. It's tough, to say the least.
And once the way things are going right now, that once you guys do open up, once the horn goes off, everybody's COVID's over, we're free, go back to living life normally. You're going to be full up round, ready to go with all the in-house.
Yeah, everything's I'm getting ready to go. Once we kind of get that indication that we think things are turning back to normal, and we thought it was happening 6 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And only to have interior dining shut down again, and so it's it's tough. I kind of call myself fortunate that we did open back then, because just to shut down again and being a new place, we don't have the history to rely on yet, right?
You need to make a big splash. Right.
So it's a little, I think, a little even more challenging, being a new guy on the block type of a thing. So you don't want to do anything half-assed. You want to make sure that the wow factor and the service and the quality and the experience are all there. It's almost a daily conversation. What we're seeing, what we're experiencing, what we think, and so it's. We'll see. We'll see how it turns out.
How's that been? The new partnership in terms of that group coming in, because if I understand correctly, they're pretty big in the whole distilling scene or the whole bar scene
Well, they own I think 7 different restaurants across the country. And then several wineries.
Yeah.
So we're their first spirit adventure.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And are they tapped into the whole distribution? I would have to imagine that they are.
They are certainly
that's
on the
probably
wine
the biggest.
side. Yeah.
That's probably the biggest thing right now is getting tapped into that. And
Yeah.
to, how's that looking? Are we going to start to see Storyhouse?
We're in conversation with our
Nice.
potential distribution partner, and again, it's interesting too. Time for them. You know, you talk about how do you sell a brand right now to retail bars, restaurants, right?
Yeah.
That whole industry is changing.
It's Bevmo, and that's it, and maybe some of the big grocery stores, and that's it.
Yeah. So you know, that's like one of those things where the sales reps that used to go out and pitch their line sheet to a liquor store or a restaurant and bar, for instance, you know, those face-to-face relationships, you know, you're not necessarily creating new ones, you're zooming the old ones.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It's interesting. So we're even looking at that as an overall thing as far as distribution rather. Is like, okay, does the old ways still make sense?
Yeah.
Or is there some hybrid or what? So we're trying to ask the right questions of ourselves and answer those as best we can. So
Amazing, dude. We're living in crazy times, brother.
I was talking to my daughter this morning, you know, she's over in Hawaii and she's talking about how the numbers are going up there and how they're threatening to shut things down there, and now they're talking about, you know, she coaches volleyball in her spare time as well as, you know, going to college, and talking about now they're talking about having the athletes wear masks while they're playing, and it's interesting times.
Yeah.
It is certainly interesting times.
Yeah. And then, I mean, what I find scary is when you read about, you know, they're saying upwards of like 30% of the restaurants that have closed aren't going to be opening up again, you know?
Yeah.
And I just can't even fathom that.
Yeah. And now, you know, it's interesting too. I think there's good and there's bad in all of that. One of the goods I think that would hopefully or potentially come out of that is that you now have a surplus of service individuals, you know, waiters, waitresses, bartenders, for instance, that you know, really, hopefully the best of the best will get picked up, and now your dining experience is going to improve. So we may have fewer,
but better,
but hopefully better.
I can see
you
that.
know,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's kind of one of those things I've thought
about. It's a positive
about.
way to look at it.
Right.
Yeah, it
you know,
certainly is.
the negative side of it is, of course, well, we don't have jobs for everybody that wants them to come back.
Yeah.
So, and I don't see how that is gonna not be a reality.
Think about New York City with all those bars and all those restaurants around all those office buildings.
Yeah.
And I can't see people wanting to go back to work in the office building in New York City. I mean, you have to take a fucking dirty subway to a dirty street and get into an elevator with strangers. And I just can't see that coming back anytime soon. So all those restaurants that feed off of that.
Yeah. One cough in the elevator, everyone's running for the fire alarm. You know? Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. To say the least, it's interesting, and we're trying to just you know, be smart and navigate it. You know, like I said, we're being new. You know, it's got good and bad to it, tied to it as well. So it's going to be an uphill battle for sure.
Well, you've been hooking and jabbing the whole time, brother.
It's been a.
So I know that you had originally talked about doing something like this, where you have like kind of club members help you with the bottling. Is that still, because I'd love to come down. If I'm around, I would love to come down with your bottling.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's, you know, we got to get around some of the employment laws and stuff like that.
Gotcha.
Technically, you can't be volunteers and we have to pay you, and which is all fine and dandy, but it is something that we, you know, once we're kind of getting rolling, that we do want to allow our patrons that are interested to come down and help us promote.
Touch the product, exactly.
It's interesting. It sounds like it may sound interesting or weird to some, but others are just like, you know, I just love to get in there and just kind of see what happens behind the scenes. And it's stuff that I do every day, and so to me, it's probably not as interesting as it is maybe to some. But I do try and kind of be a little cheeky about some of it, because, you know, trying to show the kind of the the parts that they don't always tell you about when you're going to distiller school, if you will. When you're diving a tank with a pressure washer, trying to get the scale off of a or you're on your back, working on a valve that just broke underneath your boiler. I mean, there's all these little things that fortunately the public doesn't really have to see.
Exactly.
They see all the the shiny, good tasting stuff. Yeah. But some people like to get into that, like to see the behind the scenes.
So as a distiller who works with booze all day long, after work we just want to just relax and have a drink. What do you drink? Is it a beer? Is it wine? Is it whiskey?
More often than not, it's just going to be a quick whiskey on a rock.
Really?
Yeah,
nice.
that's usually what I'll do. But I do enjoy, though, when I've got friends, I will whip up different cocktails for them.
Cool.
And so a big one lately, kind of on the gin side of things, is Aviation. It's a great little cocktail served up, and our gin really really shines in, which is kind of nice too, and stuff. But yeah, so I'll go over to friends, and it's usually the request comes that, hey, can you do a cocktail for us? And so what I love doing. So it's like usually you come over to friends, something like that. It's like, what do you guys have? What can I bring? Can I bring a dessert? Can I bring a salad? Can I bring something like? No, you bring the cocktail. Gotcha. That's pretty much kind of the default now. So it's been good. It's been fun.
Very cool. All right, brother. That was awesome, man. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Cheers.
Cheers.
Hey, everybody. This is Matt Woody Kidd, co-founder and head distiller of Storyhouse Spirits. Thanks again, Matt.
Thank you.
All right. Hey, if you're in the military, the police, fire department, or first responders, if that's you out there, thank you very much for everything you do. Stay safe. This is the Rain Man. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care.
Cheers.
Thanks for watching Rain Man's Take, observations on the world we live in. If you like the content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. You can also follow Rain Man's Take on Instagram at Rain Man's Take. Also, check out our website at www.rainmanstakepodcast.com and send your comments to rainmanstake@gmail.com. Keep an eye out for future podcasts, which will be coming out every Thursday at 5 p.m. West Coast time.